And joining me once again is Medea Benjamin, activist, co-founder of Code Pink, writer and author, and so much more. And as is not unusual for Medea, she and her organization have been in the news a bit lately. So, first of all, Medea, welcome back to the program.
Great to be on with you. Thank you.
When I first reached out to you, what I wanted to talk to you about was the incident recently on Capitol Hill, where, as I put it in my note to you, I think you were arrested for practicing democracy by posing questions to a member of Congress, Daryl Issa, or Issa, I forget how it's pronounced precisely, but and I watched a video. It was really quite extraordinary. And since then, Code Pink has also been in the news because with the assassination of Charlie Kirk recently, the other day, um, it's become a point of rhetoric on the right from Donald Trump on down that the left is to blame for this. Whoever the killer turns out to be, or whatever their motives, that somehow it's the left's fault, and particularly both Trump and his Trump alluded to being called Hitler, I believe, in his remarks from the Oval Office. I know his staff did, his press office did talk about how some protesters referred to him as Hitler. That was a reference to, you weren't there, but a Code Pink demonstration action against him at a restaurant. So I guess I wanted to start with this before we get to the Daryl Issa part. You guys are not afraid of a confrontation, never have been. Did it surprise you to find yourselves suddenly the target of blame for something like this when, obviously you're nonviolent in your approach, but and you're a peace group, so it seems paradoxical, but did it surprise you that you were brought into this controversy?
Well, yes and no. I mean, we have been maligned in so many ways during this Trump period of being accused of being funded by the Chinese Communist Party or the Russians or the Iranians or supporters of Hamas. And there have been members of Congress who've called for investigations into Code Pink on several different occasions. And there are lawsuits, these scurrilous lawsuits against us. So it's been a couple of months of attack after attack. So in that sense, no, not surprised. On the other hand, yes, Richard, because I think we're pretty much, for anybody who does know us, I mean, they might not agree with our politics, but they ought to know by now, after over 20 years, that we are totally nonviolent, that we don't want violence against anybody. Charlie Kirk, the people in Palestine, the people in Ukraine, I mean, you name it. We don't want people to be killing each other. So, in that sense, yes, it is surprising to bring us into this picture as if somehow the fact that we had Code Pink protesters calling Trump to his face the Hitler of our times should somehow connect us to the shooting of Charlie Kirk.
And you're one of the many paradoxes, I should say, in the criticism that's being directed against you folks, specifically in the left overall, for me, is that on the one hand, the killing of Charlie Kirk, which I totally opposed to, I hate murder and killing in all its forms, that it is a challenge to free speech and a threat to free speech, which in a sense I agree with. I don't think anybody should be killed for certainly don't think anybody should be killed for their speech. But paradoxically now it's being used, especially on the right, as a reason to suppress speech. So how does that work exactly? I mean, I'm still trying to puzzle that one out, but it seems to me that one of the goals is to silence people who are too direct in challenging power, depending on who the power is. What are your thoughts on that?
We've seen so many ways in which this administration is trying to silence dissent or ideas they don't agree with. We've seen people like Mahmoud Khalil, who was in Congress yesterday at a briefing, who got picked up and held in ICE detention merely for being part of the student protests at Columbia University. And he's not the only one. There are many like him. We see the number of activists being targeted by ICE, not just for their pro-Palestine position, but for their pro-immigration position. And we see students being targeted for exercising their free speech. We'll get into my being arrested, but we have been targeted, and the whole movement for Palestine has been targeted. I mentioned the lawsuits and the harassment against us, but our collegial organizations like Palestine Youth Movement or Americans for Muslim in Palestine or the group CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, all of them have been hit with lawsuits and harassment, which is also kind of funny, Richard, because since we go into Congress all the time, there have been about 14 hearings on anti-Semitism, and none that focus on Islamophobia or the repression that pro-Palestine people have been facing. So I would say that people might not be aware of it, but this has been a terrible time for free speech for people who don't agree with President Trump.
And before that, it's interesting, Medea, because, and that's why I wanted to start with free speech, because what we had, I was working with the Muslim Students Association, Jewish Voice for Peace, and a couple other groups at University of Maryland here, just trying to help in any way I could. And that was just a minor example of the kind of suppression we've seen at some of the more Ivy League schools. It's been really outrageous, I guess, because they have more billionaire donors, what have you. But it seems to me there's been kind of polite suppression and rude suppression, and the polite suppression being under President Biden, for example, the emphasis on anti-Semitism as falsely defined as criticism of Israel, and then the shutdown of free speech rights and everything else, including the use of force against peaceful students and that kind of thing. And then we have the blunter, broader instrument of Trump silencing. Did you feel at Code Pink that did you feel a sense of being silenced before Trump came in and it got worse, or was it a qualitative change, or did it come out of nowhere?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you're bringing that up because we watched the beginning of the genocide under the Biden administration, and during that time was when they cracked down on the students. During that time, and way before that, was when there was legislation in state after state against the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, and many of those were coming in quote, blue states and places where the Democrats were in control. So we know that there is so much division between the parties, but when it comes to Israel, they have been pretty much in lockstep with, a handful of exceptions. But we've seen repression under Biden. And yes, it has gotten worse under Trump because it's not just the issue of Palestine. Now there's the issue around immigration. There's the issue around not wanting National Guard in our streets. And that is not only in Los Angeles, where we saw them in Washington, D.C., but also the threats about sending these troops to places like Chicago and Boston. And so I think it has certainly been heightened under the Trump administration.
And what we see now, and it's as a peace group, I'm curious to know, what your plans are. But as I and many of us are saying, this is really, it feels like a declaration of war against certain segments of the American population. The three cities you mentioned, Los Angeles, known for having a large brown population. Washington, D.C. and Chicago, known for having a large black population in each city. I'm sure you saw the Trump meme, Apocalypse Now, but Chai Apocalypse Now, that showed Chicago burning. And I love the smell of deportations in the morning. I mean, this is not only sick stuff, but for a peace group that's used to fighting for peace I mean, to the extent one can get used to it in Ukraine or in Palestine or elsewhere around the world, we're now looking at military interventions right here in the United States, and I'm wondering what that means for a group like Code Pink.
We had a big demonstration this weekend in Washington, D.C., quite large for this city. And the positive thing about it, Richard, is that it brought together a number of issues that should be connected, but not always are. And those are the issue of ICE kidnapping people off of our streets, uh, pulling families apart, the issue of the militarization on our street, and seeing these people with heavy weapons walking up and down our streets with heavy tanks is very, very intimidating. And then the issue of Palestine as well. And all three of those were merged together quite seamlessly in this march that had, I would say, over 10,000 people,
Hmm,
which is big for Washington, D.C. You know, we're not even a million people in this city.
right.
And so that was good to see. And I think there is more bringing people together, recognizing that not only are a lot of the issues connected, but united we stand, divided we fall. You know, if we don't support each other, this is going to get really bad. So that's the positive side of people fighting back, resisting, coming together, having a lot of trainings for people about knowing your rights, encouraging people not to be silenced by all of this repression, but to speak out loudly. And of course, in Code Pink, that is our motto, which is we better be loud, we better speak directly to those in power if we want to keep the rights that we do have.
And I have been accused sometimes of having too much nuance in my communications. So, for example, I've been probably more hesitant than a lot of people with my exact same views to use words like fascist. But on the other hand, I do know my history a little. And if you look at, for example, not only the way ICE and the military behave on US streets as well as foreign streets, but if you look at the recruitment ads for ICE, I mean, this is straight up Nazi stuff. This is, protect the homeland with the blonde wife and little blonde children and be a soldier and the everybody's blonde, I mean, it's just preposterous. And nothing against blondes, but it's coded, shall we say. And so to me, it is not outrageous, we'll put it that way, to call it fascism or to say that there's something very Hitlerian about Trump as a leader. But it occurs to me in the wake of the Charlie Kirk incident that it's not only going to be the hatred from the right, oh, you shouldn't demonize us. This being from the same president who called us vermin, but we shouldn't demonize him. I suspect there will also be those kind of liberal / moderate voices that say to people like you and me, and especially to people like you, well, the Hitler stuff, dial it back a little bit. It's not civil, and it heats up the rhetoric and the environment. And what's your answer to people like that?
I think I'm a lot like you, Richard. I've been very reluctant to use the words fascism and Hitler. I didn't think they helped the argument, and that you would get pushback from people, as you say, on all sides. and that people tend to throw around the word fascist and fascism here and there and very cavalierly. But now I think we've entered a different phase. Now I see it as a time when you see what the Supreme Court, how it's stacked, what kind of uh, horrific things are coming out of that court, the ways that the Trump administration, oh, and how Trump talks about people that he doesn't like,
Hmm.
and all the firings of people in the federal government, getting rid of anybody with any suspicions that they're not 110% loyal to him. I mean, all of this is building up a kind of superstructure that does become scary. And I know when people said we might not even have an election the next time around, I'm like, oh, come on, don't be ridiculous. And now I'm thinking, hey, maybe it's not that far-fetched. And if we don't think of some of the worst possibilities, we will allow ourselves to be the frog in the boiling water where we just let the administration build up and build up and build up until we turn around and we say, what happened to our country? And I think when you see it in Washington, D.C., and you see those troops, it really does hit you. Because, Richard, it's contradictory here even. There are some people in the Black community, there's some people that live in the more crime-ridden parts of D.C.
Hmm.
that are actually happy to have those troops. And that's part of the frog in the boiling water. The troops are calling you ma'am and have a nice day, ma'am, and treat us
Right.
nicely. And you're saying, wait a minute, no, 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 don't get comfortable with that. If you want to put police who walk the streets, who get out of their cars, who actually know the neighborhood, who have some connection to the community, maybe that's not so bad. But to have these people that are coming in from the Carolinas and, all kinds of different states, and even if they're Washington, D.C. National Guard, they shouldn't be on our streets, and we shouldn't allow ourselves to get used to them being in our streets. We don't want them going overseas and fighting wars that we shouldn't be in. We don't
Right.
want them on the streets fighting a war at home they shouldn't be in.
And we shouldn't be militarizing our police the way we are either. So, I couldn't agree more, but that gets me to another point that I think is a challenge for all of us. First of all, not only that we have to make the point that speech is not the problem, but the structural problems that we have to address behind all of this. The idea that uh, you know, if our only allies against this sort of overt, increasingly overt totalitarian behavior are the Democrats, but the Democrats within the political system, but the Democrats are not willing to address the structural issues that make those residents of Washington, D.C. afraid, that drive that crime, the poverty, the inequality, the lack of health care and opportunity. If they're not really a structural racism, if they're not willing to address those things head on, then it feels like a losing battle. So I feel as if, at least in terms of electoral politics, we have to be a kind of third force. I don't, but what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we have to have the answers. If you're putting these um, uh, over $30 billion into increasing the budget for ICE, when you could have put that into making our communities safer by doing the things
Right.
that you said, providing jobs for young people, providing mental health services, providing more of the affordable housing that people need. I mean, all kinds of things that are lacking in this country that gets more unequal day by day. Then if the Democrats don't come out and stand for what Bernie Sanders has been saying and getting the huge crowds as he travels around the country, they don't have a leg to stand on because nobody wants crime. And you have to be
Right.
against crime. But you can be against crime in a way that gets to the root of the crime rather than this militarized a way that doesn't really deal with crime either, because how long are these people going to be on our streets? I mean, they say now until the end of December, and then they're going to be gone. And will they have done anything? And these people just walking around that don't even know Washington, D.C., that have no connection to the community, that's not a way to reduce crime.
No, and it's certainly whatever effect they're having won't last once they're gone. Um, and since we've moved into the political sphere, that gets us to your arrest, which was, we have a very highly flawed and broken democracy in this system. We could go on about that endlessly, and the oligarchies and all that. One thing I've always appreciated about it goes back to when I was in college and dropped in at Teddy Kennedy's office looking for something, was the accessibility that our elected officials are supposed to have. I always thought, well, you know what, that's kind of cool, actually. It's a sign of what a democracy should do. But you went to Capitol Hill and tried to speak to one of our elected representatives. And well, first it seems they tried to grab your phone and then you got arrested. What's that about?
Well, first, Richard, let me explain that for the last almost 2 years, Code Pink has been in the halls of Congress almost every single day. We go in the mornings, we go around to the offices, we visit them both in the House and the Senate. We push for particular bills or resolutions or amendments or letters or something. And it's mostly around the issue of Gaza, but not exclusively. We've been working with the group Free DC to call for members of Congress to not give permission to Trump to put the guard in our streets. We've been working on every time there's some international issue like the blowing up of the negotiators in Qatar, or the blowing up of a boat coming off of Venezuela and killing 11 people that we don't know who they are, where they were going, have absolutely no right to kill them. I mean, all of these issues we take up. So we are there on a regular basis. The police know us well. They know that we are peaceful people, that we don't touch anybody, we don't hurt anybody. The worst we could do is yell at somebody. And once in a while, we get up in a hearing and we disrupt a hearing and we get arrested for it, knowing that if we're going to get up and yell in a hearing, you're going to get arrested and you pay the consequences. But this was a case 2 days ago where I was walking very nicely next to this Southern California representative, Darrell Issa, who, by the way, I think is the most wealthy person in the Congress, and definitely has a sense of entitlement. And I was asking him if he would comment on the Israelis' attack in Qatar on the negotiators of Hamas. And he got annoyed immediately and said to me, "Put your camera away." And I was like, "No." He got to his office, opened the door, went inside. I turned the door, and you're allowed to go into these
Right.
offices. Didn't even step inside. He told his staff person to grab my phone. And I said, "Are you crazy? You grab my phone, that's an assault." And he said, "You just broke the law by coming into my office." I didn't even come into his office. Well, I laughed and I left. And then about an hour later, I heard there was an alert out by the police, the Capitol Police, to find me. They found me and they said what it was about. And I said, "Well, luckily I have it all on camera, so please take a look at this." They took a look at it and they said, "You shouldn't be arrested for that. You didn't do anything." Lo and behold, they kept me there and kept me there. And finally, they said, "There's nothing we can do. Darrell Issa wants to press charges." And the inspector general said that it was okay. And so they arrested me, took me down to the courthouse, to the jail. I have a court date on October 9th. I have to go back, then appear before a judge. But the worst thing about it is they're trying to do this to keep me away, to
Mm-hmm.
have a banning order put against me so that I can't go to the Capitol, which is my daily job. I'm not paid for it, I'm a volunteer, but I certainly take it seriously. And that's part of this wanting to reduce our access to our members of Congress, our elected officials who are supposed to respond to the public. And today, when we went back into Congress, it was a very repressive atmosphere. We
Mm.
had police following us around. We had in the Senate one of the senators, Cassidy, I was far away from him, yelling for the police to come and keep us away from him. And we said, wait, you're an elected official. Come on. So there is between, I think, the murder of Charlie Kirk and my arrest and just a more general crackdown in Congress on us. Now, we hope that we will be short term and we'll return to our ability to confront our elected officials like we've been doing for the last 2 years. But we hope that that right that we should have does not get diminished or disappear.
Meanwhile, the healthcare industry has, at last count, two full-time lobbyists dedicated to Congress for every single elected representative. I've often wondered if one takes a day shift and one takes a night shift, but they, I assume, still have free and unfettered access to Congress and to its individual members. There's really no, based on the law, there's no justification for banning Code Pink or any other citizens. They would have to, that's my understanding. Am I right about that? They'd have to really invent one. The idea that you're a present threat or something of that nature, right?
Right. I mean, we know that things that we think are impossible under the Trump administration
Right.
have done anyway, even if they're illegal. But you're right. Washington and the Congress is full of people lobbying every single day. Some of them for things like the oil industry and the weapons industry and the pharmaceuticals, and some of them for things like today Parkinson's disease or pilots coming in and wanting more support for efforts to make the planes safer and all kinds of issues. And yes, that is a positive thing about our government that we do have access to elected officials. Now, I say we have access, but we really don't have much influence because the
Right.
influence comes from money in politics. And I once went in with a group of donors to members of Congress and realized they don't even go in the office. They go right into the Capitol, escorted by members of the staff in a beautiful meeting room that's next to where they have votes. And I'm saying, oh, that's where the ones who really have influence go. And those of us who don't have that kind of influence, though we do go into their offices, and I appreciate the access that we do have. And we have access to them when they're walking down the hall, when they're walking out of the Congress and walking over to the Capitol. Sometimes they do it outside. So we feel it is important. And, you know, in the last 2 years, if your listeners and viewers haven't seen the videos, the social media that Code Pink has been doing, it's been very revealing for a lot of people who have not understood just how corrupt our system is. And we put up the videos of these members of Congress who will just say, you know, anything you ask them, they'll respond, I love Israel, or they'll respond, Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. And then we put up the amount of money that they have taken from AIPAC. So I think it is very important to keep revealing who the members of Congress, for the most part, represent. And unfortunately, it's not the great number of Americans. In the case of what Israel is doing, the opinion polls have really gone
Right.
through the roof in terms of people who don't want to keep supporting the genocide. When it comes to Democrats, it's 92% that oppose what Israel is doing. And so you would think that 92% of the Democrats in Congress would say, let's stop sending weapons. Unfortunately, that's not the case, but it is changing because of the horrors that Israel is doing and because of the lobbying that people are doing, not only in Washington, D.C., but I would say even more so in their districts, like the people who go and interrupt them in the town halls, the people who are constantly calling their local offices. All of that is important, and all of that is changing the equation. Agonizingly slow, but it is changing.
And in closing, I guess I would say, I think back to Ryan Grimm published a few years ago a chart showing that for new members of Congress on the Democratic side, saying that, how they should spend their day. And I think it had 3 or 4 hours a day of fundraising. So, in other words, members of Congress spend 4 hours every day immersed in the world and the culture and the worldview of wealthy donors. So when people say, well, they're being loud or, raising their voices, well, we need to do that to counteract the suffocating, overwhelming presence of big money donors. So, Medea, where can people go to find out more about what you guys are doing?
They can go to our website, codepink.org, or our social media, Code Pink, or my name, Medea Benjamin. And also, if anybody has any time to come to Washington, D.C., you can spend 3 hours with us. You can spend a week with us, whatever, and go around with us. It's really a wonderful group of people. We are warm and welcoming, and you can sign up online at codepink.org under the events for Washington, D.C.
It's also great cardiovascular exercise.
Excellent. I get over 10,000 steps every day. Don't have to go to the gym.
We depend on your support here at the 0 Hour, so please give whatever you can at any of the links you see on your screen. Thanks so much.